Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to close your eyes for just a second. Picture the quiet, almost heavy hum of a hospital waiting room, or maybe the stark, high-stakes tension of a courtroom. It's in these spaces that we grapple with literally the most profound biological and ethical questions of our existence. But, so often, the way we actually talk about these issues, it just feels so detached, so clinical, and honestly, aggressively polarized. Well, today, we're stepping away from those loud, predictable arenas of modern bioethics. We're going to explore a darker, more atmospheric, and deeply intellectual terrain. We're looking at a massive paradigm shift in how we view developing life, human connection, and the sheer weight of our choices. So imagine you're sitting in a local coffee shop, scrolling through the news, or maybe watching activists and politicians protesting outside a courthouse. You already know the script by heart, right? It's this endless tug of war using the exact same slogans, my body, my choice on one side and the right to life on the other. But here's a thought. What if treating pregnancy purely as a clash of opposing legal adversaries is actually ruining our ability to see human connection? What if, in our absolute obsession with figuring out what we are legally permitted to do, we've completely lost sight of a much deeper ethical question? Section 1. Beyond the rights debate. Okay, let's dive into this. Look, if you're feeling totally exhausted by the polarized shouting match of modern political debates, where everyone is armed to the teeth with a legal right but literally no one seems to be talking about wisdom, you are definitely not alone. The source material we're exploring today challenges us to completely reframe the entire conversation. Notice the massive paradigm shift here. On one hand, we've got the standard debate centered entirely on rights and rules, what philosophers call deontological and utilitarian theories. But on the other hand, we have a totally different approach, championed by philosopher Rosalind Hursthouse. She suggests something pretty radical. What if we temporarily put justice and laws on the back burner? Hursthouse argues that asking, do I have a right to do this, is actually the wrong starting point. Virtue ethics instead asks, what kind of person do you become when you make this choice? It's a total shift from asking what is permissible to asking what is virtuous. Section 2. The character of choice. Drawing on frameworks from philosophers like Elizabeth Harriman, an absolutely crucial distinction emerges in the ethics of abortion. And it's this. Having a legal or even a moral right to do something doesn't automatically mean that doing it is wise, good, or virtuous. I mean, think about it. You might have the legal right to completely cut off a friend who's struggling, but that doesn't mean it's the character trait of a good friend, right? To really grasp this, we need to understand a foundational concept from ancient Greek philosophy, eudaimonia. Now, while this often gets translated simply as happiness, that really doesn't quite capture the gravity of the word. Eudaimonia is about true, deep human flourishing. It's not just about having a good time or getting your way in a legal dispute. Virtue ethics aims to literally map out the path to a profound, fully realized life. It suggests that our choices shouldn't just be about avoiding breaking the law. They need to be active steps toward building a flourishing character. Section 3. The reality check on unborn potential. So, to apply this framework to the topic of abortion, the philosophers in our sources argue that we have to strip away the political jargon entirely. We need to look squarely, and maybe a bit uncomfortably, at the raw biological reality of interrupting developing life. And this brings us to another foundational concept from Aristotle, telos. In plain language, telos is an inherent biological trajectory toward flourishing. When virtue ethics looks at the unborn, it doesn't just see an abstract lump of cells, nor does it immediately jump to legal definitions of personhood. Instead, it recognizes a biological reality, a vulnerable trajectory placed entirely in our hands. The ethical weight here comes from the fact that this developing life has its own telos, a natural endpoint of becoming human. And cutting that short, well, that is inherently a matter of intense moral seriousness. Section 4. The cold convenience dilemma. So, how does all this play out in our everyday moral dilemmas? Well, if we recognize this biological trajectory, we have to ask a really difficult question. Can taking a life in its earliest biological stages ever truly be treated as just a routine, casual medical procedure? Rosalind Hursthouse's argument points out a stark logical dissonance here, and this brilliantly illustrates the point. When a woman experiences a miscarriage, it's widely recognized as a tragedy, right? Deep grief is the natural, completely appropriate response to that loss of developing life. But Hursthouse points out that no one would react to a spontaneous miscarriage by saying, oh, what a fuss about nothing, which, let's be honest, is exactly how you might react to a botched haircut or maybe a routine appendectomy. Therefore, treating a deliberate abortion as if it were on the exact same level as just removing an appendix completely ignores the reality of what is actually being lost. This quote from Hursthouse captures the nuance perfectly. Treating abortion as no big deal or just a matter of casual convenience risks severely eroding our reverence for human life. Within the framework of virtue ethics, being callous or light-minded about the termination of a pregnancy isn't just some legal misstep. It demonstrates a deep flaw in character. It shows a fundamental lack of appropriate appreciation for the gravity of human life and its development. Section 5. Wisdom in Messy Realities. But of course, as we all know, life is rarely simple. What happens when agonizing choices aren't driven by cold convenience, but by extreme poverty, domestic violence, or severe life-threatening health crises? This is exactly where the clinical tool of virtue ethics comes in: Phronesis. This translates to practical wisdom. Phronesis is how we navigate messy, desperate, real-world situations without turning to rigid dogma on one hand or cold indifference on the other. It's the wisdom to look at a truly devastating reality and make a deeply difficult choice, all while understanding the full weight of the competing moral factors involved. So the crucial point is that virtue ethics allows for the reality that sometimes abortion might actually be the right decision in incredibly dire circumstances. However, and this is a big however, even when it is the right decision, a virtuous agent, someone exercising phronesis, recognizes the tragic loss involved. They don't approach the choice with light-mindedness or celebration, but with a heavy heart. They recognize that some evil or loss has been brought about, even if avoiding it was entirely impossible. Section 6. Vulnerability and community failure. Now, we need to expand this ethical burden outward. It's not just about the isolated individual making a choice in a vacuum. Drawing on the work of ethicist James F. Keenan, let's look at a sort of clinical diagnostic checklist for our interconnected society. Keenan roots human dignity in our shared vulnerability, suggesting specific virtues we absolutely must cultivate. Humility requires recognizing that we are all interdependent. Vigilance means we can't just look away from a neighbor's precarious reality. And mercy? That is the willingness to actually step into the chaos of another person's life to eradicate their suffering. When we view abortion through this lens, we have to ask a tough question. How virtuous is a society really if it leaves mothers entirely unsupported in their vulnerability and then turns around and blames them for making desperate choices? Let's move to and see how this builds into the concept of mutual recognition. As Keenan and other scholars point out, truly recognizing human dignity requires us to move past alienation, where we just see others as problems to be solved or adversaries to beat. We have to move past the desire for dominance and focus instead on our mutual vulnerability. We are fundamentally bound to one another. And when we fail to give due recognition to the vulnerability of both the mother and the developing life, well, we fail as a moral community. Section 7. A Society of Solidarity. The sources we've explored today make a really compelling case that an ethics of vulnerability and virtue must ultimately be used to unite us rather than divide us into warring political factions. Recognizing human dignity means we have to do the hard work. It means moving beyond just securing the legal right to be left alone. It requires actually securing a more equitable distribution of rights, genuine care, and deep solidarity. It means building a world where the precariousness of life, whether it's the life of a woman in crisis or the developing life of the unborn, is met with mercy and support rather than judgment and isolation. We'll leave you with this lingering, provocative thought. It is incredibly easy to shout slogans. It is incredibly difficult to build a virtuous character and a merciful society. If we put down the legal rulebooks for just a moment and face the mirror, are we actually building a society equipped with the practical wisdom, the deep compassion, and the mutual solidarity required to protect and uplift both mothers and developing life? Take a moment to really reflect on what kind of society and what kind of person you are helping to build. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer.